My daughter asked the question right after almost destroying our mailbox with a purple bike, which felt about right for Lily Carver. She was 8 years old, missing one front tooth, wearing a helmet covered in dinosaur stickers, and operating under the dangerous belief that every thought in her head deserved immediate public release. I had one hand on the back of her bike seat and the other hovering near her shoulder, jogging beside her down our driveway in that awkward half-crouch every parent knows, the one that makes your knees question every decision you have ever made. Across the street, Mara Whitlock sat on her porch with a paperback open in her lap, though she had been on the same page for at least 15 minutes. She did that sometimes, sat there with tea, or a book, or a bowl of strawberries, pretending the evening air had called her outside when really her eyes kept drifting toward my yard. I told myself I only noticed because firefighters were trained to notice things, even former ones. That was a lie, but it was a professional-sounding lie, and I appreciated its effort. "Keep your eyes forward," I told Lily, because she had turned her whole head toward Mara and was now steering by faith. Lily shouted that she was keeping her eyes mostly forward, which was exactly the kind of answer that made me tighten my grip. We lived on a quiet street in Greenville, South Carolina, the kind with old trees, wide porches, and neighbors who knew too much because nobody's curtains were as private as they thought. My house was a small white craftsman with a cracked front walk, 2 hanging ferns I was slowly killing, and a porch swing Lily refused to use because she said it made old lady noises. Mara lived directly across from us in a blue house with black shutters and a porch light that came on earlier than everyone else's. She had moved in 6 months before with 3 suitcases, 2 bookshelves, and the kind of careful smile people use when they are trying to look fine without inviting questions. I should have kept things neighborly. I was 36, widowed, raising a daughter who still slept with one of her mother's scarves under her pillow, and I had no business noticing how Mara tucked her hair behind one ear when she was trying not to laugh. Lily wobbled past the mailbox, shrieked like she had survived combat, and then slammed both sneakers to the pavement even though I was still holding the bike. "I did it," she announced, despite having traveled maybe 9 feet and nearly ending our postal service. I told her it absolutely counted, because fatherhood is mostly lying with encouragement. Mara laughed from across the street, not loud, just enough that I heard it and immediately pretended I had not. She was in a soft yellow cardigan over a white tank, bare feet tucked under her on the porch chair, her dark hair pinned up badly with what looked like a pen. She worked as a pediatric physical therapist, which I knew because Lily had once asked her what she did all day, and Mara had explained it as helping kids teach their bodies to be brave again. I had thought about that sentence more than was reasonable. Maybe because my body had been brave for years and my heart had turned into a locked storage closet. Maybe because Mara had looked at me when she said it, like she knew. I was getting Lily turned around for another try when she leaned close to me and whispered, with no actual whisper involved, that Miss Mara was watching again. I told her Mara was allowed to sit on her own porch. Lily narrowed her eyes at me with the suspicion of a tiny detective and said, "She's not watching the porch, Dad. She's watching you." My hand slipped slightly on the bike seat. Across the street, Mara looked down at her book too fast, which was the first mistake. Lily saw it. Of course she saw it. Children notice everything except where they left their shoes. Before I could redirect, bribe, threaten, or suddenly remember an urgent chore inside, Lily cupped one hand around her mouth and called across the street, "Miss Mara, do you love Dad?" For 1 second, the whole neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. A sprinkler clicked 3 houses down. A car rolled slowly past the stop sign. Somewhere, a dog barked once and then apparently decided even he wanted to hear the answer. I froze with one hand still gripping Lily's bike seat and the other halfway in the air like I was directing traffic nobody could see. Mara's face changed so quickly it almost hurt to watch. The amused softness disappeared first, then the polite neighbor mask, and underneath both was something startled and real. She closed her book carefully, as if buying herself time with manners, then looked from Lily to me. I wanted to speak. I should have spoken. I was the adult, technically, but my mouth had gone completely useless, which was unfair because I had survived burning buildings, roof collapses, insurance hearings, and 1 kindergarten talent show involving 30 recorders playing different songs at once. "Lily," I said finally, That is not something we yell across the street. Lily looked offended and told me she had not yelled, she had projected. Mara pressed her lips together like she was trying not to smile, but her cheeks had gone pink. She stood from her chair and came down the porch steps, stopping at the edge of her walkway instead of crossing the street. That distance felt suddenly important. She could have laughed it off. She could have said no in that bright adult voice people use when children accidentally open locked doors. Instead, she looked at my daughter with a seriousness that made my chest tighten and said she did not know if love was a word people should throw around from across a street, but she did know that Evan Carver was very easy to care about. Lily blinked, processing only the part that sounded like victory. I processed all of it and wished very badly for a fire alarm, a sinkhole, or any emergency that would let me become useful instead of exposed. Mara's eyes shifted to me then, and the humor in them was nervous, but not gone. She added that she liked watching because I looked different when I was with Lily, softer somehow, like I forgot for a few minutes that I was supposed to carry the whole world correctly. That sentence landed harder than the question. People had called me responsible for years. Dependable, strong, solid. All the words you give a man when you need him upright and quiet. Nobody had called me soft like it was something worth protecting. I felt my fingers loosen from the bike seat. Lily, completely unaware that she had just cracked open something I had spent 3 years sealing shut, looked up at me and asked if easy to care about meant almost love or practice love. I told her there was no such thing as practice love, and Mara, traitor that she was, said softly that maybe there was, but adults gave it boring names so they would not scare themselves. That was when Lily tried to climb back on her bike without looking, caught her sneaker on the pedal, and tipped sideways into the grass with the slow-motion dignity of a falling lawn chair. I lunged, too late to stop the fall but fast enough to keep it from being worse. She did not cry at first. She stared at her scraped knee like it had personally betrayed her, then looked at Mara and announced that blood had arrived. Mara was already moving. She crossed the street without asking, quick but calm, and crouched beside Lily with a gentleness that made something in me ache. She asked permission before touching the knee, complimented Lily's dramatic survival skills, and told her the scrape looked brave but not dangerous. Lily sniffed, then took Mara's hand like that had been allowed all along. When Mara glanced up at me, there was a question in her face now. Not the one Lily had asked, but one meant only for me. Are you going to let me closer? Or are you going to pretend this is only about a bandage? I should have said I had it handled. I had said that sentence so many times it practically lived in my mouth. I had handled grief, school lunches, smoke detector batteries, nightmares, birthday parties, and the impossible task of explaining to a little girl why some people could love you completely and still not get to stay. Handling things was what I did when I did not know how to feel them. But Lily was leaning into Mara's side, and Mara was looking at me like she saw the exact moment I wanted to retreat. So I cleared my throat and said the bandages were in the kitchen cabinet, second shelf, blue box. Lily perked up immediately and told Mara that people who loved Dad should know where the bandages were. Mara went still. I did too. Then Lily held out her scraped hand toward our house, like a queen inviting someone into a castle, and said, "Come on, Miss Mara. You should learn." Mara followed us into my kitchen like someone entering a room she had imagined but refused to expect. I noticed that, which annoyed me, because noticing Mara had become a habit I did not remember approving. Lily hopped dramatically across the tile on one foot, her purple bike helmet still crooked on her head, while I opened the cabinet and knocked over a box of sandwich bags, a flashlight, and something that might have been cough drops from the previous decade. Mara did not tease me right away. That was how I knew the moment still mattered. She simply crouched beside Lily at the small breakfast table, took the blue bandage box from my hand, and asked my daughter if she preferred boring beige cartoon cats or the emergency glitter ones. Lily forgot her injury long enough to gasp that glitter bandages were not for regular blood, they were for special blood. Mara nodded like this was medical fact, and said scraped knee courage definitely qualified. I stood by the sink holding a damp paper towel and felt useless in my own house, which was new and uncomfortable and maybe not entirely bad. The thing about Mara was that she never took over a space loudly. She entered softly, then somehow the room adjusted around her. My kitchen was nothing impressive, just white cabinets, a dishwasher that made a sound like it was remembering a war, Lily's spelling test on the fridge, and one faded photo of Emily holding Lily when she was 2. I saw Mara notice the photo. She did not stare. She did not look away too quickly either. Her eyes rested there for exactly long enough to show respect, then returned to Lily's knee. That small choice got under my ribs. Most people either avoided Emily's picture like grief was contagious or treated it like a shrine they needed to comment on. Mara did neither. She cleaned Lily's scrape with careful hands, warned her before the sting, and when Lily hissed through her teeth, Mara told her that was an excellent dragon noise. Lily immediately made a louder one, because pain was apparently more tolerable when it had a soundtrack. I leaned against the counter and tried not to look like a man watching a woman be gentle with his child and having feelings about it. That should not be a difficult facial expression, but apparently mine had no training. Lily, revived by attention and glitter adhesive, began asking questions with the speed of a courtroom attorney paid by the hour. She asked Mara if she fixed children's legs at work, if she had ever fixed a giraffe, if she had a husband, and whether people could be almost in love, or if that was like being almost hungry. I told Lily to maybe give Miss Mara time to breathe. Mara smiled down at the bandage wrapper and said she was fine, then answered each question with more grace than any adult should be expected to have under interrogation. She said she helped children get stronger after injuries or surgeries. She had never fixed a giraffe, but would consider it if the giraffe had insurance. She did not have a husband, and almost love was sometimes what scared people called love when they were not ready to admit it yet. Lily looked at me with great satisfaction, as if Mara had just submitted evidence on her behalf. I pretended to inspect the sink faucet. Mara's voice stayed light, but her hand paused while smoothing the bandage over Lily's knee. I saw it. So did something in me that had spent years learning the difference between jokes that hid nothing and jokes that guarded a locked door. Lily asked if Mara wanted a husband someday, and I stepped in too quickly, telling Lily that was personal. My daughter sighed at me and said grown-ups made everything personal right before it got interesting. Mara laughed then, a real one, and the sound warmed the room enough that I forgot for a second to be careful. She told Lily that she had wanted a family once, very much, but wanting the right thing with the wrong person could make you feel silly for wanting it at all. Lily did not fully understand. I did, or at least I understood the shape of it. Lily eventually decided the glitter bandage required a mirror inspection and limped down the hall with the exaggerated bravery of someone who would be sprinting again in 5 minutes. The second she disappeared, the kitchen changed. The air did not become awkward exactly. It became honest, which was worse. Mara stood and gathered the torn wrappers into her palm. I told her she did not have to do that, and she said she knew, then kept doing it anyway. I apologized for Lily, because apologizing was easier than saying anything true. Mara dropped the wrappers into the trash and looked at me with a softness that made my defenses feel embarrassingly visible. She said Lily had not invented anything. She had only said it before we could bury it under neighbor manners. I looked toward the hallway, then back at her, and admitted I did not know what I was allowed to want anymore. Saying it out loud made me feel disloyal and relieved at the same time. Mara did not move closer. I respected that and hated it a little. She rested one hand on the back of Lily's chair and told me wanting someone was not the same as replacing someone. I looked at the photo on the fridge before I could stop myself. Emily smiled from under a sun hat in that picture, young and bright and gone in a way my mind still rejected on certain mornings. Mara followed my gaze, then said quietly that love did not work like a parking space, one person pulling in only after another left. It was not a perfect line. It was too strange and practical and exactly the kind of sentence that would stay with me. I tried to joke that parking metaphors were bold for a first kitchen conversation, and she said she could switch to porches if I preferred, but I had a feeling porches were dangerous territory for both of us. That made me smile, and because she smiled back, the room tilted again towards something I wanted too much. Lily came back wearing the confidence of a child who had survived a medical event and announced that the bandage looked expensive. Before I could answer, tires crunched in the driveway. My stomach tightened before I even saw the car, because some sounds belong to certain people. Through the kitchen window, I saw Marsha Bell's gray sedan pull in behind my truck. Emily's mother stepped out holding 2 grocery bags and the expression of a woman who expected the world to explain itself immediately. Mara saw my face change, then glanced toward the window. Lily lit up and ran toward the back door, shouting that Grandma had to see her blood. Mara took one quiet step back from the table, as if remembering she was in a house that carried more history than she had been invited to touch. When the door opened and Marsha's eyes moved from Lily's bandage to Mara standing in my kitchen, I knew the evening had just become something none of us could bandage neatly. Marsha Bell had a way of entering a room without raising her voice and still making every object stand straighter. She was 62, compact, silver-haired, and practical in the way women become practical when life has handed them too many things nobody else knows how to carry. She had been kind to me after Emily died, not soft exactly, because softness had never been her natural language, but loyal. She stocked my freezer, drove Lily to dentist appointments when I forgot school dismissed early, and once sat at my kitchen table for 4 hours helping me assemble a princess castle with instructions apparently written by someone who hated parents. I loved her. I also feared her opinion more than I liked admitting. So when she stepped inside holding grocery bags, saw Mara near my table, saw Lily holding Mara's hand, and saw whatever guilty expression had failed to leave my face, my first instinct was to explain everything before I knew what everything was. Lily saved me from that by sprinting to Marsha and announcing that she had crashed her bike, almost died, received glitter medicine, and Miss Mara had come inside because she might love Dad. The grocery bags dipped in Marsha's hands. Mara's fingers loosened gently from Lily's, not yanking away, just giving the moment room to breathe. I said Lily's name in the tone all parents use when they are trying to stop a train with a napkin. Lily looked at me like I was being unreasonable, and added that nobody had confirmed it yet, but there was evidence. Marsha's eyes moved to Mara then, polite and careful, and colder than the room had been a minute before. Mara did not shrink exactly, but I saw her gather herself. She smiled and said, "Mrs. Bell, it was nice to meet her properly," and she was sorry the introduction came with blood and glitter. It was a good line. Marsha did not take it. "Lily already had a mother," Marsha said. She said it quietly, but quiet did not make it lighter. The sentence hit the kitchen floor between us and left no easy place to step. Lily looked confused first, then worried, as if she had accidentally broken a rule she had not known existed. I felt heat rise in my chest, part anger, part shame, part the old reflex to protect everybody from everybody else. Mara could have defended herself. She could have told Marsha that nobody had said anything about replacing anyone. She could have looked to me to fix it. Instead, she looked at the photo on the fridge, the one of Emily and Lily, and her expression softened with such open respect that my anger lost its footing. She said yes, Lily did have a mother, and from everything she had seen and heard, she must have been deeply loved. Then Mara looked back at Marsha and added that no decent person would try to take the place of a woman who was still present in the people who loved her. Marsha's face changed just enough that I noticed. Not forgiveness, not approval, but a small stumble in the wall she had put up. Lily leaned against Marsha's side and whispered that Mommy liked sparkly things too, which made Marsha close her eyes for half a second. I hated that moment because it reminded me grief was not a single wound. It was a weather system. It moved through all of us differently and ruined clear days without warning. I told Lily to show Grandma the bike scrape in the living room, and Marsha accepted the escape because she needed one as much as I did. She set the groceries down with too much care, took Lily's hand, and walked out of the kitchen. Before she disappeared around the corner, she glanced back at Mara, and this time her look was not sharp. It was wounded, which in some ways was harder to stand. The kitchen went silent after they left. Mara kept her hands folded in front of her, the way people do when they are trying not to touch anything that is not theirs. I said I was sorry, and she shook her head before I finished. She told me grief makes people guard doors that are not actually being attacked. I stared at her because that was not the kind of sentence a person borrowed from a greeting card. It had weight. It had experience under it. I asked how she knew that, and for the first time since she crossed the street, Mara looked away from me. She said she had once spent a long time standing outside doors, trying to decide whether she was welcome or only useful. Her voice stayed even, but the edge of it did not. I thought of what she had said earlier about wanting the right thing with the wrong person, and a name I did not know yet seemed to move behind her eyes. I wanted to ask. I wanted to know who had taught her to stand like that in my kitchen, careful and ready to apologize for taking up space. But I also knew the difference between being invited into a wound and trying to pry one open because it explained something. So I only said that Marsha was not always like that. Mara gave me a small smile and said she believed me, which somehow made me feel more ashamed, not less. I told her Marsha lost her daughter, and sometimes she acted like any happiness near me had to be inspected for betrayal. Mara nodded. Then she said something that stayed with me longer than I expected. She said people who love the dead sometimes mistake stillness for loyalty. I looked at Emily's picture again, and for the first time in a long time, I wondered if some part of me had been doing that too. When Lily came back, she had apparently forgiven the universe and was eating grapes from one of Marsha's grocery bags. Marsha followed behind her, calmer now, but not warm. She thanked Mara for helping with the scrape, and Mara accepted the thanks without trying to stretch it into approval. That restraint mattered. It told me she understood this was not a room she could win by being charming. Lily asked if Mara could stay for dinner, and I felt every adult tense at once. Mara saved us by crouching to Lily's level and saying, "Not tonight," but she was very proud of the brave knee and expected a full recovery report tomorrow. Lily hugged her before anyone could stop it. Mara froze for a fraction of a second, then hugged her back with such careful gentleness that my chest ached. She did not hold Lily like she was claiming her. She held her like she understood being trusted was a responsibility. I walked Mara to the front porch because I needed air, and because letting her leave alone felt cowardly. The evening had cooled, and her porch light across the street had already clicked on, a small gold square waiting in the blue dusk. She stopped at the top step and told me again that I did not need to apologize. I said I did, because this was exactly what I had been afraid of. Lily attaching too fast, Marsha hurting, me wanting something before I knew how to make it safe. Mara looked at me for a long moment, and the softness in her face did not make the truth gentler. She said safety was good, Evan, but sometimes I used it like a locked door. Hearing my name and her voice made it harder to hide. I almost reached for her hand. I did not. She noticed that too. Of course she did, but she did not punish me for it. She simply stepped down onto the walkway and said goodnight. Later, after Marsha had gone home, and Lily was asleep with her dinosaur helmet beside the bed like a trophy, I stood in the dark living room and looked across the street. Mara's porch light was still on. She sat in the chair where she always sat, but she was not reading now. She was just there, wrapped in a cardigan, looking smaller than she had in my kitchen and lonelier than I wanted to admit I had noticed. For 6 months, she had been the one crossing the distance with her eyes. That night, with Marsha's words still heavy in my house and Mara's sentence about stillness and loyalty still turning inside me, I opened my front door and crossed the street. Mara looked up when my shoes touched the bottom step of her porch, but she did not look surprised. That bothered me more than if she had jumped. It meant some part of her had expected me, or hoped for me, or maybe simply learned that men often cross streets after doing emotional damage and then called it concern. She sat in the old wicker chair by the rail with a mug cupped between both hands, her cardigan pulled around her like armor that had lost its confidence. The porch light above her turned everything gold and too honest. I stopped at the foot of the steps and told her I had seen the light on. She tilted her head and said the lamp was going to be unbearable now that I had given it emotional responsibility. I laughed because she wanted me to, and because the alternative was admitting that I had crossed the street at almost midnight just because the thought of her sitting there alone made my house feel wrong. She told me I could sit if I wanted, then added that the porch had not been formally approved for widowed father anxiety, but she was willing to risk it. I sat on the top step instead of the chair beside her, partly because it felt less presumptuous and partly because if I sat too close, I was afraid my hand might do something honest before my brain filed the proper paperwork, Mara noticed. She noticed everything. For a while, we watched the empty street, the parked cars, the moths throwing themselves at porch lights like romance had a suicide clause. I told her Marsha was not cruel, and Mara said she knew. I said she had loved Emily fiercely, and Mara said that kind of love probably did not know where to go after losing its person. The way she said it made me turn. Her face was calm, but calm on Mara could mean 5 different things, and only one of them was peace. I asked her who taught her to talk about grief like she had lived in its spare room. She smiled into her mug, but it did not reach her eyes. Then she told me about Grant Hollis. Not all at once. Mara was not the kind of woman who handed over pain in a neat little speech. It came out in pieces, with pauses between them, like she was checking whether the porch would hold. Grant had been her fiancé for almost 2 years, charming in public, respected by everyone who liked polished shoes and confident opinions. In private, he corrected her laugh, her clothes, the way she told stories, the way she got excited about children at work, the way she cried during commercials if they had dogs in them. At first, she thought compromise was love. Then she realized she had become so good at being easy that she no longer knew what she liked when nobody was watching. She said the engagement ended when he told her wanting a warm, messy family made her sound desperate. She said it lightly, like a joke that had lost too much blood. I wanted to hate him loudly. I wanted to say the kind of things men say when anger is easier than tenderness. Instead, I stayed quiet, because Mara had not invited me onto that porch to rescue the past. She had invited me, maybe, to listen without making her smaller. She looked at me then, almost testing that. I told her he was wrong. She gave me a faint smile and said I would need a stronger review if I wanted 5 stars. So I told her he was stupid in a tailored suit way, which was the most dangerous kind because people mistook it for wisdom. That got a real laugh out of her, small but alive. Then she looked down at the mug again and admitted that when she moved across from me, she had promised herself not to want anything from anyone for a while. She was going to be quiet, useful, professionally pleasant, and impossible to embarrass. Then I burned grilled cheese on a Tuesday afternoon and apologized to Lily like the sandwich had suffered a personal injustice, and apparently that ruined her plan. I covered my face with one hand, because I remembered that grilled cheese, Lily had called it toast with consequences. Mara laughed again, but her voice softened after. She said she watched because I was careful with people even when I thought no one saw. I listened to Lily's stories about school like they mattered, not like I was waiting for my turn to speak. I fixed Mrs. Albright's porch railing and refused payment, then acted offended when she paid me in banana bread. I sat in my truck some evenings for 3 minutes before going inside, and Mara said she knew that pause, the one where a person gathers themselves before becoming needed again. That was the part that undid me. Not the almost love question, not the watching. That. The fact that she had seen the 3 minutes I hid from everyone else. I told her I did not know what to do with being seen that clearly. My voice came out rougher than I expected. Mara did not apologize for it. She only said she did not want to be another person I had to take care of. I looked at her then, really looked, and told her I was scared because I did want her. The words sat there between us, plain and reckless. I said I wanted her when she teased me, when she was gentle with Lily, when she looked at Emily's picture like a deserved room, when she said things I kept thinking about after she left. I wanted her, and then I felt guilty, like wanting had turned me into a man I would not respect. Mara's eyes softened, but she did not let me hide inside shame. She said loving someone new did not erase the person I lost, but teaching Lily that the rest of life had to stay locked away might hurt her more than honesty ever would. My hand was on the porch floor between us. Hers rested near the leg of her chair, close enough that I could see a small scar along her knuckle. I almost reached for her, almost was safe, almost let a man feel brave without risking anything. Mara looked at my hand, then at me, and after a quiet second, she slid from the chair onto the step beside me. She did not take my hand. She placed hers beside it, palm down, close enough that our fingers nearly touched, and left the choice there like a door standing open. I stared at that small space between us. It felt ridiculous that half an inch of porch wood could hold so much fear. Then I moved my hand until my fingers brushed hers. Mara let out a breath she must have been holding, and I turned my hand over. She slipped her fingers into mine. Nothing dramatic happened. No music, no storm, no grand confession from the sky. Just Mara's hand in mine and the late-night street going quiet around us. but it felt like the first honest thing I had done for myself in years. After a while, she squeezed my hand and said softly that if I ever asked her inside my life, I had to ask because I wanted her there. Not because Lily needed someone, not because I was lonely, and not because she happened to be across the street with her light on. I looked at her profile in the porch glow, at the woman who had been watching from a distance because wanting too much had once been used against her, and I knew she was not asking for a promise. She was asking me not to make her a soft place to fall unless I meant to stay awake for the landing. Before I could answer, she looked down at our joined hands and whispered that she could not be another porch light left on for a man who was not sure. The next morning, I woke up with Mara's last sentence still sitting beside me like it had followed me home and taken a chair at the kitchen table. I made Lily oatmeal, burned the first batch, denied burning it, and then watched my daughter scrape brown sugar into the replacement bowl with the seriousness of a scientist testing dangerous chemicals. She asked if Miss Mara was coming to the bike safety day at school, and I froze with the coffee pot in my hand. The event had been on the calendar for weeks. I was helping the fire department run a safety booth because apparently former firefighters never fully escaped reflective vests, folding tables, and children asking whether fire trucks had secret snack compartments. Lily had been excited for days. She wanted to show everyone she could ride without training wheels, which was generous, considering the mailbox still looked nervous. When she asked about Mara, she did not sound casual. She sounded hopeful in a way that made my chest tighten. I told her I had not asked Mara. Lily looked at me over her oatmeal and said, "Why not?" There were at least 12 adult answers to that question, and none of them worked before 7 in the morning. Because your grandmother might be there. Because Mara and I held hands on her porch last night, and I am still trying not to feel like I committed a crime against a memory. Because you like her too much already. Because I like her too much already. Because wanting something good does not automatically mean you know how to hold it without hurting someone. Instead, I said I did not want to make Mara feel obligated. Lily considered that and told me maybe grown-ups should stop deciding what other people feel before asking them. I hated when children became accurate before breakfast. Mara was watering the flowers on her porch when I stepped outside after school drop-off. She wore faded jeans, a white shirt, and her hair in a loose braid that made her look softer than my self-control preferred. I crossed the street with my hands in my pockets like that would make this less obvious. She turned when she heard me, and for 1 second we both remembered her hand in mine from the night before, not dramatically, not like a movie, more like the air remembered and did not know where to stand. I told her Lily had asked if she was coming to the bike safety event. Mara kept watering the same plant long enough that the soil probably needed legal protection, then turned off the hose and said that was not the question she needed me to ask. I looked at her, and she gave me a small, steady smile. If you want me there, Evan, ask me. Not as Lily's emergency glitter nurse, not as the neighbor who happens to be free. So I asked. It should not have felt like jumping from a roof, but it did. I asked if she would come with me to the school event as my guest. The words sounded too formal, too careful, and completely sincere. Mara's expression shifted, not into relief exactly, but into something close. She said yes, then immediately warned me that if any child asked whether she loved me, she was retiring from public life. I told her that was unrealistic because Lily had probably already formed a committee. Mara laughed, and there it was again, the feeling that my life had opened a window. Before she went inside, she touched my forearm lightly and said she knew this was not small for me. I wanted to tell her it was smaller than losing someone, and bigger than I knew how to explain. Instead, I said I knew it was not small for her either. Her fingers rested there 1 extra second before she let go. The school field that afternoon was loud with whistles, bicycle bells, folding chairs, sunscreen, and children in helmets shaped like cartoon animals. I stood near the fire safety table in a navy polo, demonstrating how smoke alarms work to a group of third graders who mostly wanted to know if firefighters slept in their boots. Lily spotted Mara before I did and ran to her like she had personally ordered her from the universe. Mara hugged her carefully, then looked past Lily to me. She did not wave big. She simply smiled, and I felt that smile land in my chest in front of teachers, parents, and 3 firefighters who would absolutely make fun of me later if they had any emotional intelligence at all. She helped Lily adjust her helmet, then crouched beside a nervous little boy whose chin strap was twisted and talked him through it with that calm physical therapist patience. I watched her from across the field and realized, with a strange kind of justice, that I had become the one staring. Marsha saw it too. Of course she did. She arrived with a container of sliced apples and a face that said she had come prepared to be civil but not careless. For the first half hour, she kept her distance from Mara, staying near Lily's class table and speaking to other grandparents. Then, while Lily rode slowly through a line of orange cones with Mara cheering quietly from the side, Marsha came to stand next to me. She did not look at me at first. She watched Lily wobble, correct herself, and laugh when the back tire clipped a cone. Then Marsha said Lily's heart was not an experiment. I felt the words tighten around me, but I did not answer sharply. I knew what grief sounded like when it dressed itself as warning. I told her I knew that. She said Mara seemed kind, which somehow sounded more dangerous than an insult. Kind women could still leave. Kind women could still become important. Kind women could still make a child believe in a future and then disappear. I turned toward her and said Lily's heart was not a museum either. Marsha looked at me then, startled. I had not planned the sentence, but once it was out, I knew I meant it. I told her Emily would always be Lily's mother, always, and nobody who entered our lives decently would change that. But preserving Lily's love for Emily did not mean sealing every new door in the house. Marsha's mouth tightened, and for a second I thought she would walk away. Instead, her eyes grew wet in that stubborn way people's eyes do when they refuse to let tears behave like tears. She said she was afraid Lily would forget the sound of Emily's laugh. I told her Lily would not, because we would keep telling the stories, not because I stayed lonely enough to prove a point. Marsha looked back at Mara, who was now laughing because Lily had put a traffic cone on her head and declared herself queen of safety. The corner of Marsha's mouth moved despite herself. For a little while, I let myself believe the day might survive. Mara came over with Lily, who demanded that I confirm she had conquered balance, gravity, and fear. I told her gravity still had concerns, but she was doing great. Mara stood beside me, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel the choice in it. Marsha handed Lily an apple slice and, after a pause, offered one to Mara too. It was not acceptance. It was not even peace. But Mara accepted it with quiet gratitude, and I saw something fragile pass between them, a truce made of fruit and exhaustion. Then Mara's smile faded. I followed her gaze toward the parking lot, where a man in a light gray suit stood beside a black car, holding flowers like an apology he expected someone to admire. Mara went completely still. The man smiled when he saw her, polished and certain, and started walking toward us as if he still had the right. Mara whispered one word under her breath, and I knew before she said anything else that this was Grant. Grant Hollis walked across that school parking lot like the world had been arranged for his entrance. He was tall, clean-shaven, and expensive in a quiet way, the kind of man whose shirt looked ironed by someone who feared consequences. The flowers in his hand were white lilies wrapped in brown paper, tasteful enough to make the gesture look thoughtful if you did not see how Mara's face had emptied the second she recognized him. I had seen that expression before, not on her, but on people standing outside damaged homes after a fire, staring at the place where normal used to live. Lily tugged on Mara's sleeve and asked if that man was bringing flowers for Bike Safety Day. Mara did not answer right away. Her hand found the edge of the folding table, and for 1 second I thought she might sit down. Every instinct I had told me to step in front of her. I had spent too much of my life moving toward danger before thinking, and Grant looked like a different kind of smoke, polished and poisonous. But before I could move, Mara touched my wrist. It was small, barely pressure at all, but it stopped me because it was not fear asking me to stay back. It was choice. She did not want me to rescue her before she had decided whether she needed rescuing. So I stood beside her, close enough for her to know I was there, far enough not to make her voice disappear behind mine. Grant reached us with a smile that belonged on a charity brochure. He said Mara's name like it was still familiar in his mouth, then looked at the flowers as if surprised to find himself holding them. He said he had been hoping to talk, and when his eyes flicked to me, then to Lily, then back to Mara, his smile sharpened by one invisible degree. Mara asked how he found her. Her voice was steady, but I could feel the effort in it from where I stood. Grant said a mutual friend mentioned she had moved to Greenville, and he had been in the area, which was the kind of lie men tell when they want persistence to sound romantic instead of invasive. He held out the flowers. Mara did not take them. That small refusal changed the air more than shouting would have. Grant glanced around at the children, parents, orange cones, and fire department table, then lowered his voice just enough to pretend he was being respectful while making sure we all understood he was controlling the volume. He said he did not want a scene. Mara's mouth tightened, and she told him that was generous, considering he had brought one with him. I almost smiled, but Grant did not. He looked at me again and asked if I was a friend. Lily, because the universe had apparently assigned her to truth enforcement, said I was her dad, and Mara came as his guest. Grant's eyebrows lifted with soft theatrical surprise. He said, "Of course," in a way that made those two words feel dirty. Then he looked at Mara and said she always did have a weakness for wounded things, especially if they came with a ready-made family. I felt my hand curl at my side, not into a fist exactly, but into the memory of one. Mara's touch returned to my wrist, firmer this time, and I made myself breathe. She looked pale now, but her chin lifted. She told Grant he did not get to make her tenderness sound pathetic anymore. For the first time, Grant's mask slipped. Only a little. Enough. He said he had come to apologize, and Mara asked if the apology was hiding somewhere behind the insult. A couple of parents nearby went quiet in that nosy, pretending not to listen way adults learn from children. Marsha stood near the snack table, watching with Lily partly tucked against her side. I hated that Lily was seeing even pieces of this, but I also knew children did not need a perfect world as much as they needed honest adults inside an imperfect one. Grant sighed and told Mara she was doing that thing again, turning everything into proof that she had been wronged. His voice was smooth, almost patient. That was what made it ugly. He made cruelty sound like guidance. Mara flinched, just once, and I understood how a person could be corrected into silence one calm sentence at a time. I stepped forward then, not between them, but beside Mara. Grant looked relieved, like he had finally found the man-shaped problem he preferred. He told me I should be careful, that Mara loved projects, that she liked men she could feel sorry for. I looked at him and said Mara did not owe either of us a performance of forgiveness. The sentence came out quieter than I expected, but it carried. Grant's eyes cooled. He said he had no idea what Mara had told me. I told him she had told me enough, and the rest was hers to keep. Mara turned her head toward me then, just slightly, and something in her face changed. Not dependence, not rescue. Recognition. I had not spoken over her story. I had guarded the edge of it. Grant tried one more time. He softened his voice, said Mara used to be more reasonable, said he remembered when she wanted a family, a home, children running through a yard, all the things she was now apparently auditioning for across from some widower's porch. The word widower hit the space between us like a thrown stone. Marsha stiffened. Lily looked up at her grandmother, confused. That was when Mara took one step forward and, for the first time since he arrived, reached for the flowers. Grant's expression brightened with premature victory. Mara took them, looked at them for half a second, then handed them to the teacher collecting decorations for the safety booth and said they would look nice next to the helmet display. A laugh escaped someone behind us. Grant's face went red. Mara's voice trembled when she spoke again, but it did not break. She told him she was not auditioning for anyone's life. She was living her own, badly some days, bravely on others, and he did not get to show up with flowers and rename her courage as desperation. Then she turned away from him. Not dramatically, not with a final speech. She simply turned, and that did more than any insult could have. Grant stood there for a second with nothing left to hold, then looked at me like I had taken something from him. I had not. That was the point. Mara had taken herself back. He left with the stiff walk of a man who had expected an audience and found witnesses instead. Afterward, the event continued because life is rude that way. Children still rang bike bells. Firefighters still handed out stickers. Lily asked if Mara was okay, and Mara crouched, smiled too hard, and said she would be. Marsha surprised me by touching Mara's shoulder once, before leading Lily toward the water cooler. It was not much, but after the way the day had begun, it felt like a door opening a crack. I found Mara by my truck 10 minutes later, standing with her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the pavement. She said she was embarrassed, and I told her she had looked brave. She shook her head and said bravery should feel better. I told her sometimes it felt like shaking in a school parking lot after telling a man no in front of a helmet display. That got a broken laugh out of her, and then the laugh folded into tears she tried to stop before they became visible. I opened the passenger door, not to take her anywhere, just to give her a place away from everyone's eyes. She climbed in, and I stood outside with one hand on the roof, giving her room. For a while, she said nothing. Then she looked at me through the open door and told me she wanted me. And the words hit harder because they came without flirtation, without porch light softness, without any place to hide. She said she wanted me, Evan, but she would not stand on my porch forever waiting for me to decide whether wanting her made me guilty. She had spent too long being chosen in private and corrected in public. She would not do it again. Then she wiped her cheek, looked toward the field where Lily was laughing with Marsha, and whispered that if I was not sure, I needed to let her stop hoping before hope became another thing she had to recover from. I did the thing Marsha, Natalie, Mara, and probably my own dead wife would have called predictable if the universe had given them a group chat. I pulled back, not dramatically, not cruelly, not with some speech about needing space. I simply became useful. I packed Lily's lunch with the good grapes, fixed the loose hinge on the back door, answered 3 work emails at midnight, cleaned the garage shelf I had ignored for 2 years, and told myself I was being responsible. Mara did not text. I did not text. Across the street, her porch light came on at its usual time, and I found at least 6 reasons not to look directly at it. Men like me could turn cowardice into a checklist if given enough household tasks. By Sunday afternoon, my house was cleaner than it had been in months, and I felt worse in every room. Lily noticed before dinner. She was sitting at the kitchen table drawing a map of what she called the Kingdom of Bikes, which apparently included a hospital, a cookie factory, and a jail for mean pedals. I was making spaghetti and pretending the sauce needed my entire moral attention when she asked if Miss Mara was sad because of the flower man. I told her Mara had handled a hard thing very bravely. Lily kept coloring the same patch of road blue and said, "Then why are you acting like she moved away?" I turned off the burner too fast. She looked up at me then, not accusing exactly, but confused in the way children get when adults begin behaving around an obvious truth instead of through it. I told her grown-up things were complicated, and she sighed with the exhausted disappointment of someone who had heard that excuse from inferior minds. Then she asked if I was sad because I liked Mara and liking her made me miss Mommy. That one took the air out of me. I sat across from her because standing suddenly felt dishonest. For 3 years, I had tried to protect Lily from the sharpest parts of my grief. But children grow up in the weather of a house whether you name the storm or not. I told her missing her mom and liking Mara were not the same feeling, but sometimes they stood close together and made me afraid I was doing something wrong. Lily considered this, then set down her crayon and said Mommy would not want me to be lonely on purpose. She said it like a fact, not comfort. Maybe that was why it hurt more. I asked her how she knew that, and she shrugged, saying Mommy always made me dance in the kitchen even when I was grumpy. I looked at Emily's picture on the fridge, the sun hat photo, and for the first time in a long while, I did not hear accusation in the silence around it. I heard music I had stopped playing because I thought stillness was respect. Marsha came by after dinner with a container of peach cobbler and the kind of face people wear when they have spent the drive over arguing with themselves. Lily ran upstairs to find her missing library book, leaving Marsha and me alone in the kitchen with the cobbler between us like a peace offering neither of us wanted to name. She asked if Mara was all right after the school event. I said I did not know, and the shame in that answer was sharper than I expected. Marsha looked toward the fridge, toward Emily's picture, then back at me. She told me she had been unfair to Mara. I did not answer because I knew what apologies cost her. She said seeing Grant speak to that woman like she was something he had misplaced made her understand, at least a little, that Mara was not trying to steal a place in our family. She was trying to believe she could stand somewhere without being corrected for it. I told Marsha I was scared. The words came out simple, almost embarrassing. She pulled out a chair and sat down, slower than usual, like her bones had finally admitted the week had been heavy. She said she was scared, too. She was scared Lily would forget Emily's laugh, scared I would build a new life and leave old grief boxed in the attic, scared that if she made room for Mara, it meant making peace with a world that had taken her daughter and kept going. I had no answer for that. Some pain does not want an answer. It wants a witness. So I sat with her. After a while, Marsha wiped under one eye with her thumb and said loving someone after loss was not the betrayal she had been afraid of. Pretending I had no heart left might be. Then she pushed the cobbler toward me and added, in her old sharper voice, that if I hurt Mara by being noble and stupid, she would be disappointed in me for entirely new reasons. That was how I ended up standing on Mara's porch just after 9, with my hands empty and my excuses finally worn out. Her porch light was off. For a second, I stood there staring at the dark window and felt the awful hollow drop of a man arriving after the door had already closed. Then I heard her voice from the shadows near the swing. She said I could stop looking like a tragic mailbox. I turned, and there she was, sitting in the dark with her knees tucked under her, no book, no tea, no golden square of light making her easy to find. I told her I thought she was not home. She said she was home. She had just gotten tired of leaving a light on for men who were not sure. I deserved that. I climbed the steps slowly and stopped far enough away that she would not have to move unless she wanted to. I told her I was sure, and Mara looked at me with eyes that had learned not to trust beautiful timing. She said not to say that unless I understood what it cost, so I did not rush the words. I told her I had wanted her in every careful, inconvenient, undeniable way a man could want someone while still pretending he was only being decent. I wanted her across dinner tables and school fields, on porches and in ordinary mornings, laughing with Lily and arguing with me about whether smoke alarms counted as decor. But I did not want her because Lily needed a woman nearby. I did not want her because grief had made my house quiet. I did not want her because she was soft enough to land on. I wanted Mara Whitlock because she saw the parts of me I had buried under responsibility and somehow did not make me feel weak for having them. Her face changed in the dark, but she stayed still. I told her there was one place I needed to take her before I asked for anything else. She looked wary, and I understood why. I held out my hand, not touching her yet, and told her it was not my house. It was the memorial garden where Emily's name was engraved. Mara did not say yes right away. She looked at my hand in the dark like it might be another kind of promise men made when they were scared of losing the room. I could not blame her. Grant had probably used beautiful timing like a tool, and I had spent enough days proving that silence could hurt even when it meant well. So I did not reach farther. I kept my hand open between us and waited. After a long moment, she stood from the porch swing, slipped her fingers into mine, and said quietly that if I was taking her to a ghost, I had better not expect her to compete with one. The sentence hurt because it was honest. I told her Emily was not a ghost to compete with. She was part of the truth, and if Mara was going to step into my life, I owed her the whole room, not just the cleaned-up corners. The memorial garden was behind a small community chapel 10 minutes from our street, tucked between 2 magnolia trees and a brick wall covered in bronze nameplates. I had not been there at night before. In daylight, it looked peaceful. In the official way places of grief are supposed to look peaceful. Trimmed grass, stone benches, flowers changed by volunteers who did not know the weight of the names they watered. At night, it felt more private. The chapel windows were dark. The air smelled faintly of rain and cut leaves, and Mara walked beside me without filling the silence, just to make it easier. That was one of the reasons I had fallen for her before I gave myself permission to say it. She knew when quiet was not empty. She knew when a man was trying to carry something without dropping it in front of her. Emily's name was on the lower right side of the wall. Emily Rose Carver, beloved wife and mother. I had chosen those words because they were true and because I had not known how to fit a whole life into metal. Mara stopped beside me, close but not touching, and bowed her head slightly. She did not perform sadness. She did not try to look like she belonged there. She simply gave the name respect. I told her Emily used to sing badly on purpose when Lily was fussy, that she put cinnamon in coffee because she claimed regular coffee tasted like office carpet. that she had once made me dance in the kitchen during a thunderstorm because she said fear hated rhythm. My voice shook only once, and Mara reached for my hand then, not to pull me away from grief, but to stand in it with me. I told Mara that for a long time I thought loving anyone else would mean asking Emily to move over, like my heart was some small bench with one seat. Mara's fingers tightened around mine. I said I knew now that was not how love worked. Love was not a chair someone lost when someone else sat down. It was more like light in a house. Some rooms stayed lit because of who had been there. Some rooms waited because you had been afraid to open the curtains. I looked at Mara then, and she was crying, but softly, the kind of tears that did not ask to be solved. I told her I did not want her as Lily's replacement mother, or my grief counselor, or the woman across the street who kept a porch light on for a man too scared to walk over. I wanted to date her in daylight, slowly, honestly, with room for Emily's memory, Lily's heart, Marsha's grief, and Mara's own life that deserved more than being folded into mine like a missing piece. Mara looked at the nameplate, then back at me, and said she had been afraid that wanting us made her greedy. She had wanted the messy little things, Lily's helmet in the hallway, my terrible oatmeal, porch conversations that turned into dinner, someone calling across the street because the light was on. She said part of her had loved me before it was sensible, maybe before it was fair, but she had been trying not to punish herself for wanting a home where no one corrected the size of her heart. I stepped closer and told her I was not asking her to shrink. Not for me, not for Lily, not for the memory of anyone. Mara let out a breath that seemed to leave years behind it. Then she said, very softly, "Then ask me again." So I did. Not loudly, not with a speech big enough to scare either of us. I asked Mara Whitlock if she would let me choose her properly, in front of people, in ordinary days, in slow steps, with no hiding behind Lily, no hiding behind grief, and no pretending the porch between us was safer than the truth. She smiled through tears and said yes, and when I kissed her there under the magnolia trees, it was not the kind of kiss that erased anything. It honored what had been lost, what had survived, and what was finally brave enough to begin. When we pulled apart, Mara rested her forehead against mine and whispered that the porch light would be on when we got home, but only because she wanted me to see where I was welcome. Months later, the porch light became our joke and our signal. If Mara's light was on, Lily and I could cross with leftover pancakes, bike stories, or some emergency involving a missing library book. If my porch light was on, Mara came over with tea, work stories, and opinions about my smoke alarm placement. We went slow, because slow was not fear anymore. It was care. Marsha still had hard days, but she started telling Mara stories about Emily instead of guarding them from her, and the first time Mara laughed at one of those stories with tears in her eyes, Marsha reached across the table and touched her hand. Grant became a name Mara could say without folding inward. Lily learned to ride her bike all the way from our driveway to Mara's and back, ringing her bell like she had invented freedom. One evening, almost a year after that first terrible question, I stood on my porch watching Mara help Lily adjust the seat on her bike. Lily looked up at her and asked if she loved Dad now or if adults were still being weird about words. Mara looked across the street at me, smiled in that quiet, dangerous way of hers, and said she loved me very much, but Lily should not act surprised because she had been the one to expose the investigation. Lily shouted that she knew it, and I crossed the street laughing before Mara could hide her red face behind a wrench. When I reached them, Mara tugged me close by my shirt and kissed me in the soft evening light, while Lily groaned that romance was ruining bike maintenance. And for the first time in years, happiness did not feel like betrayal. It felt like memory and hope living on the same street, two porch lights glowing, and a woman who had once watched from a distance finally standing close enough to stay. Do you think loving again after loss means moving on, or moving forward with room for what came before? And have you ever seen a child ask one innocent question that exposed what every adult was trying not to say? Tell me in the comments. If this story stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and come back for the next one.